This is not a fire simulation in Blender. This is actually just a material mapped to an object that can be duplicated and rendered in real time super quickly. I'm Ken Profit, and in this Blender tutorial I'm going to show you how to make fire in Blender without making fire. Let's get right into it. We're going to be using, like I said, just a simple object with an animated material, and you combine a few things together and it looks really cool. This works really well for large scale fire. If you need fire to render really quickly, this is a great solution that I found, and it looks really cool. If you want to download this blend file without doing any of the work, it is available through my Patreon, so check that out, link in the description. For now, let's jump into Blender and get started with this. So the first thing we need to do is create an object that our fire texture can be animated on. So I'm just going to clear our scene, delete the default cube and everything. And of course, with that deleted, let's go ahead and bring back the cube. Because, you know, it's a Blender rule, you never keep the default cube, you have to delete it. I'll tab into edit mode, and I'm just going to select this top face here. I'll go to front view and just kind of map out what will be an egg shape. So with this done, I'm going to add a modifier, subdivision surface, and now we have kind of a smoothed out little pill here. Control R, create a loop cut, and again, you can kind of make whatever shape you want to make. Something like that. You can always come back and edit it later. That's going to work just fine for what we need right now. I'm going to go ahead and shade that smooth. I'm going to split my window up here and set this to be our shader editor. I'll press N to get rid of that side panel and create a new material. And the magic is really going to be all in the material of this object, this little fire egg. So I'm going to go ahead and delete the principled BSDF. We're not actually going to use that. And I'll press Shift A and add in a mix shader node and hook that up into our material output. And we're going to mix together a transparent BSDF plugged into the top and also an emission node plugged into the bottom because fire is emissive. So if we go all the way to 0, then you should have 100% transparent, which we don't. If you go all the way up, you should have 100% emissive. So this object it's kind of hard to tell, but it's not actually transparent. And that's because we need to come to the material settings of our object, and underneath the blend mode, set this to alpha blend. And now that'll turn it transparent because this is an EEVEE optimized material. So that's why you need to set that to alpha blend. If it was cycles, it would do it automatically. So now we can start mapping out the basic texture for our fire material. So I'm going to add in a Musgrave texture and hook that into the emission. I'm going to set our mix shader all the way up to 1 so that we can completely see what we're doing here. And you might see some weird artifacting there. I've noticed, I believe this is a bug with EEVEE right now. You can get rid of it in the viewport for now just by checking backface culling. And we can come back to that later, because when you do your final render, you'll want to uncheck backface culling, but for now it kind of does the trick of taking care of that artifacting. So now on our Musgrave texture, this is where the majority of the magic is going to happen with the fire. We won't mess with any of the settings just yet. That's going to come later. But for now, what we can do is work on animating this texture. I'm going to make use of a simple add-on called the Node Wrangler add-on. You don't have to use this, but it makes your life a little bit easier if you enable that. What you can do with the Node Wrangler enabled is select a node, press Control T, and you'll get the texture coordinate and mapping node connected to that, which is great. And now we can animate our fire going any direction we want. Obviously, we want the flames to be going upwards, which means we want to animate along the -Z axis right there. So of course, you can just hover over and animate like you can animate anything in Blender. If you press I, go to your different keyframe, animate, press I, and now it's animated. Or to make things easier, because you know, a fire, sometimes you might just want to scatter it throughout a scene and you don't necessarily know how long your timeline is, we can make use of just a simple driver. Now this isn't a tutorial on drivers, but I can just show you how to set up a really simple one so that this texture stays animated no matter the length of the timeline. So let's come here to the Z. We know we want to animate it along the -Z. What we can do is right click that channel and select add driver. We are going to use scripted expression, but we don't need this variable down there, so delete that. The expression is going to be frame, the word frame, / and then we'll do about -80. Okay, and then you can click update dependencies. So now if you play, you can see, woohoo, the beginnings of the eternal flame. So you can adjust this by coming in here, and you can actually type right in there. So say you want it to go much faster, set that number smaller, and there, that's just a really easy way of animating your driver. So I'm going to set it to about 75. That's working well for now. And obviously you need the fire to taper off the closer it gets to the top of your object. You also want to kind of blend the edges so we don't get that sharp line. Okay, so we need to make a couple of masks to decide what part of our material is emissive and what part is translucent. How did that get there? We want transparent. Be careful when you set those nodes up. Transparent is different from translucent. Yeah, what parts are transparent, what parts are emissive. Okay, so let's create the mask for this material. The first thing I'm going to do is add in a gradient. So Shift-A, add in a gradient texture. And if we Control-Shift-Click, we can view that gradient, and you can see it's going left to right. So we need to rotate it. We can do that by pressing Control-T, getting our mapping node up there. And we can just rotate the y-axis by 90 degrees. And, oh, that was location. Rotate the y, and there we go. Now the gradient is going bottom to top. And we can further emphasize this with a color ramp node. So there we go. The black parts will be opaque. The white parts will be where the fire is. So we can switch those around, because obviously you want the fire to taper off as it gets to the top of the object. So this is all customizable, totally what you want it to be. I'm going to set this to B-spline, make it kind of a softer fall off. So now if we set this as the factor of that mix shader with transparent, not translucent, transparent and emissive, then we can hook all that up. And now, woohoo, the fire starts to get transparent the closer it gets to the top of the object, which is working really, really well. All right, and like I said, we want to do the same thing for the edges. So you could, get rid of rotation, maybe start mixing together different gradients. That might work. But what I'm going to do is actually use a layer weight node and choose the facing output of that to create kind of a clever mask. So this isn't really at all what the layer weight node is for, but we can sort of hack it for our purposes. So if I view this as specifically the facing output, you'll notice no matter where we rotate our little egg capsule here, we get a perfect mask, essentially, that we can use to taper off the edges. All right, and so I want to have further control over this, again, with a color ramp node. And we want to switch these around because the black is the part that we're masking out. So I'm going to add another marker here and create a softer taper. Maybe do one more, just so we have a nice soft taper going to the edges. And then of course we'll set that to B-spline so that it's nice and soft. So this isn't perfect. I'm sure there's other ways of doing this, but this is just a method I found that kind of takes care of the sharp edges of, probably the biggest limitation of a fire texture is that it has to be mapped onto an object. So, all right, so now we need to mix together, actually multiply together these two masks. So we can do that with, use a math node or just a mix node set to color. And then I'm going to set this node to multiply and make sure the factor is all the way up so that we're multiplying both of these together. Then if we view that, you can see we get the best of both worlds of these masks. So now this becomes our new mask for what's transparent and what is emissive. And there you go. Now you can see the flames tapering as they get to the edge and also as they get to the top of our little egg capsule there. But we have one less part to mask out, and that is these areas coming from our Musgrave texture. We need the animation to follow that mask. So we're going to use this Musgrave texture to add the color to our fire, but we can also just use it as a mask. So once again, just repeating the exact same steps. Add a color ramp node, feed it into that Musgrave texture, and then Shift-D to duplicate this mix node, and then connect it in there. Now we get rid of those spots in our fire, and we can map just what you see here, this grayish, smoky look, which we'll use for smoke as well, but we can also map that to fire. So that's pretty much it. This is kind of the basic setup for everything you need to create procedural fire material, because now we can take all these steps. We can make sparks, we can make different scales of flames, and we have smoke automatically. Right now, we already have smoke. So what I'm going to do is add a new material, select the one we just made, and duplicate it. I'll name this one smoke. Add a new material, duplicate it, name this one sparks, if I can type. Add a new material, duplicate it, and name this fire big. And the first material we'll name fire small. So now these, you should have 4, and you can keep going. You can make as many of these as you want to, but you should have at least 4 materials that are all exactly the same. The only thing we're gonna start tweaking is the color of the flames and also the scale and all these details right here in this Musgrave texture. So I tried to keep this as simplified as possible, so there's not a lot of math nodes and not a lot of things you have to tweak. You can easily customize it just by tweaking a few minor settings. So now that all these are in place, our object should still be mapped to the first material, the fire small material. And we want to add some color to this. So I'm going to press Shift A, and the node of the day, I guess, is this color ramp node. And we can just map this. It's fed into our emission node. We can just map it to some basic fire colors. So a fire usually starts as red and then kind of works its way up to white. So there's some orange colors in there and some yellow colors. If anyone's like a chemist or something, you can tell me the exact spectrum of a fire material. I don't want to go completely white because we'll have a lot of emission, but something like that. You know, something general fire color. Looks good. All right, let's set the strength of this emission value up to 15. And now you can see we're starting to get something that's looking like fire. What we can do now is start playing with the size and scale and dimension of this Musgrave texture. So for the small flame, I'm going to crank the scale of this up. We'll go to about a 12. And then the detail, I'll start to crank up as well. Maybe 6. And dimension, you can start cranking this down, and you'll start to see, you want to be careful when you slide, but you start to see how it looks like fire. Be careful with playing each of these settings kind of affects the previous setting. So just be careful as you tweak them. You don't want to go too crazy. You also want to be careful that it doesn't get too sharp, or else it'll be obvious that it's just a texture. I might set the scale down to 10 for my small fire. Yeah, that's a little better. So that's working for the small fire. We need larger flames kind of inside. But before we do that, we want to add more displacement to this object itself. And that'll further sell the idea that this is kind of, that fluid flame object. So what I'm going to do is come in here to subdivision. I'm going to do one more level of detail for our subdivision, just so there's more geometry for our displacement to work. Add modifier and displacement. Check new displacement, and you can use any displacement. I'm going to use clouds. And I'll do the scale set to about 0.5. And then I'll come back here to the strength, and I'll turn this down to a 0.5. And the coordinates will use an object so that we can have control over the displacement of this object. And we need an object that will drive the displacement. So Shift A, and I'm going to add in an empty plane axis. Just move this over here so you can see it. And we can choose that axis right there. So now if we move this empty, you can see we're getting displacement. We kind of want the warping distortion to move upwards on the object. So you can animate this, of course, or we can do the same thing on the Z. We can just add a driver. So I'm going to right click, add driver, same expression, frame / no question mark / and we'll go 100. Okay, delete that variable. Let me see, edit driver, update dependencies. There we go. So now the object is getting displaced. The object that the texture is mapped to is getting displaced in real time as well. And you can also add rotation if you want, further displacement. That's kind of cool. So I might add a driver on rotation as well, just to add a little bit more displacement, a little more interesting. You know, all this is totally up to you. I might also come in here to our object, Control R, create a few more loop cuts, and just kind of modify the general shape of this as well. And what that does also, by giving it more geometry, it kind of makes the displacement a little bit sharper. So again, kind of rounding out the whole capsule there. All this is totally up to you. You don't have to do some of these steps, but it's just kind of a preference thing for me. I still want to keep the actual object relatively low poly so that it's easy to move around and duplicate. Let's go to rendered mode and see what our fire's looking like. We're already getting something that looks like fire, which is really great. So now I'm going to Shift D, duplicate this object. I'll go to wireframe and scale it in. I'll press R and Z and just rotate it around. And we want to map some larger fire to this one. So I'm going to press Shift H just to isolate this object. And it still has the small fire material mapped to it. So let's select our fire big material that we duplicated and assign it. And right now it's just going to be our smoke. So we want to once again go through the steps of adding color. And it's good that this color is a little bit different. You don't want to be exact. You want to have variation. Maybe a little more orange, a little darker flame. And for this, I'm going to set the scale to 1.5, lower scale. I'll set the detail to 2.75. The dimension I'll take down to 0.4. And we'll leave the last setting at 2.9. All right. So now we get some bigger fire, bigger flame in the middle. This is a good time, I should have mentioned, on all these materials, uncheck that backface culling option that we checked in the beginning. All right, so now we get some nice bigger flames going. They're not as crisp, so you might want to punch up the detail. What I might choose to do is just adjust the timing of this one as well. Since this material is completely independent of the other one, maybe make it a little bit slower. Anyways, you can vary up your material. It's going to really help you. And let's punch up the strength of this. All right, cool. I might adjust the scale of this down to 1 just to get some nice big flames in there. I'm pretty happy with that. Now we can move on to our next layer. But first we can bring back, so I'll name this object up in my outliner. I'll name this big flames. And this first object, I'll name it small flames. And so if we bring them back, when you combine them together, you can see what we get. Starting to just really look like it's actual fire. I do think with these combined together on the small flames, I might want to take the scale down, maybe to 8. And I kind of want to slow down this as well. So you can see how adding all these aspects together, we're starting to get, just the trickery, the illusion of real-time fire. All right, let's keep going. So I'm going to grab one of these little egg shapes again. I got to find a better word for that. And I'm going to Shift D, duplicate it, and press SZ, scale along the Z axis, and scale up. And no one make any jokes. I don't need any jokes right now. Nobody in the comments say anything. Okay? All right, this is going to be our sparks. So let's grab this object and assign the sparks material. We can just go ahead and add, same thing, add a color ramp node. This doesn't need to be really, this can be all one color basically just orange. Might have a slight gradient. This can be really bright. We'll do 25 for the strength of it. And let me isolate this, Shift H, go to rendered view. The scale, this is where the magic happens for the sparks, we'll set the scale up to 200. And now obviously that doesn't really look like sparks, but up here with the color ramp, if we just start pinching these in, punching that up, then you can really decide how many sparks you want coming out. And you want it above the flames. That's why we kind of scaled this up. You want to make sure that it's rising above your actual fire. And let's get a little bit of red in there. There, that's good. That's feeling better. And you might adjust the scale. It's all up to you how big you want these embers. It'd probably be a pretty good idea to do a couple different layers of these. So if you have like sparks large, shifty, duplicate, sparks small, and then with that, just grab again that sparks material we just made, duplicate it, and name this spark small, assign it, and then make this one be really small. Might change the color as well. There isn't enough detail in this. Let's crank up the detail. Oh, the dimension is what we need. Let's set the dimension down and the detail up. I'll set the scale of the small ones up. Now we can take out some using the color ramp. But there we go, that's looking pretty good. And now the speed is way too crazy. So let's come over here to the speed. I'm working in the large ones, and I'm gonna take the speed way down. Crank this up to 200. All right, so that's the sparks. Sparks and embers looking good. So now let's bring back our flames. And you can see as you start to layer all these things on, looking pretty cool. Final thing is smoke. So we already have the smoke material. Let's just duplicate one of these again. I'll go into wireframe and start to scale this up. You want to do a couple different layers of smoke. So let's make sure this one has the smoke material assigned. And I'll isolate it for now just so we can view that. And the smoke, you definitely want to change the timing. Let's go about a 110. And on the Musgrave texture, let's set the scale to 6. The detail will go up to 15. Dimension down to 1. And the last setting that I can't pronounce because I don't want people to make fun of my pronunciation, up to 3. And there you go. We get some nice wispy smoke. You can adjust the density with this color ramp. So grab that and kind of taper this down however much you want to. So I'll name this object smoke small, shifty, duplicate it, kind of scale it down, rotate it, R and Z. You want to make sure you're varying the rotations of each of these objects. And I'll name this object smoke large, and then same process, grab that smoke material, duplicate it, and we'll name this smoke big. I don't know why I'm not being consistent with the names, but you get the idea. All right, and so let's assign the big smoke material, and all we're gonna do here is just take the scale down so that we get just some more here. Let's isolate that. Might punch this up so you see it. What you might do, if I'm seeing a little bit of sharp, like right here, you can kind of see where there's some distortion from the object. You might want to add a subdivision surface after the displacement. Just one level, and that pretty well takes care of that. Make sure the render is set to 1, because you still want it to render quickly. So if you run into any of that, I only noticed it on these smoke objects. You might want to add a subsurf on that. So this is both of the smoke objects viewed together, and you can see that looks pretty cool. Pretty good smoke. You can map it to a color if you want. The standard, the gray, black, white gradient is just coming from the actual texture. So you can adjust them with this color ramp if you want to adjust the kind of the look, or you could add a color the same way, and you could even make it more emissive. Totally up to you. However you want your fire to work in your scene for your particular fire setup. All right, so now I'm going to start to bring all of these layers back. And there you go, looking pretty good. Now, of course, you can keep going with multiple layers. You can adjust all of this by just scaling down the objects and moving them around, rotating them. So if you want a little less sparks in there, you want them coming from different places, you want to make sure that this feels fuller and that there's different levels. So you could keep duplicating and adjusting materials, but you can actually get away with doing a lot just by duplicating these objects, scaling them in, rotating them around. So I might grab some small flame, shifty, duplicate, S and Z, scale along the Z axis, scale it down so there's some, you can see shooting up in the middle like that. Make sure you're varying the rotation and the scale. And what's great is this all is, this is real time, all rendering perfectly in real time with no issues. It's just a few objects with displacement on them and some really cool textures mapped to them. So what I like to do at this step is, set your background to completely black. And then, of course, you want to enable bloom. So you get some nice glow in EEVEE. And there you go. There we have fire rendered in Blender in real time, 100% procedural, totally customizable, ready for you to start burning things down. All right, I hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you so much for watching. It's kind of a throwback to the old school way of doing tutorials that I used to do, a little less polished, more of a long form format. So if you enjoyed it, leave a comment and a thumbs up. Really, really appreciate it. And like I said, I did launch my Patreon with this tutorial. So if you want to download this blend file and support me on Patreon, that'd be a huge help to me, and a big thank you to all of you who have been with me from the very beginning, watch my tutorials. I really appreciate all the comments and the love through the years. So check out my Patreon. And as always, I'll see you next time in the next Blender tutorial.